In racing, winning is kinda hard. It's part of why wins are celebrated with so much honor and fanfare. It's genuinely a difficult thing to accomplish. Formula E, as far as motorsports go, has quite a bit of parity, meaning that it's effectively easier to win a race because more than just a few drivers have a chance at winning, but because it's easier to win, it's effectively harder to win, because the level of competition is so high, there are a lot more drivers you have to beat in any odd race to take the victory. In its 11-year history, 89 drivers have entered an E-Prix, and only 24 drivers have managed to win. And while the list includes some drivers you forgot even won, what's almost as interesting is the list of drivers who haven't won a race. Among them is Nick Heidfeld, the driver who holds the record for most podiums without a win in Formula 1 and holds the exact same record in Formula E. But the driver recovering today actually holds that record with him. 8 podiums, but no wins. You may be able to give Heidfeld some benefit of the doubt in that during his 4 years in Formula E, the teams he raced for, Venturi and Mahindra, only scored 3 wins, all with the incredibly talented Felix Rosenqvist, and were never in serious contention for a title. But this driver raced for 6 seasons, and in half of them, his teammate went on to win the Drivers' Championship outright. The opportunity was there, but in the end, it was the story of always the bridesmaid, never the bride. Today, we look back at the Formula E career of Andre Lotterer, who I feel was the best driver without a win. Andre Lotterer is a pretty highly recognized name in motorsports. He won a Super Formula title, 2 Super GT titles, 2 World Endurance Championship titles, and to cap it all off, 3 24 Hours of Le Mans. His resume is stacked, and he's found success in almost every series he's entered, except for maybe that one start he made in F1 for Caterham. But despite all of this, he was unable to score a single Formula E victory. The story begins back in 2017. After Porsche announced they would be dropping their LMP1 program at the end of the year, Lotterer began looking for other opportunities and caught the eye of Leo Thomas, racing director for the Techeetah Formula E team. At 36 years old, he wasn't exactly a prospect, but he could provide some stability after the team had gone through 3 drivers in the season prior, alongside their clear number 1 in Jean-Eric Vergne. Lotterer joining Formula E was pretty surprising. In fact, after attending the Season 2 finale in London, he wasn't impressed at all, calling it unexciting to both watch and drive, and not a sport, but a political tool. Man, how times can change. With Lotterer joining Vergne alongside Techeetah, the team looked incredibly strong heading into the 4th season. However, he'd also be coming to Formula E with 0 experience behind the wheel of one of their cars, getting his first laps during the 2017 Valencia test where he wasn't the most impressive. While teammate Vergne qualified on pole, Lotterer would start his first race in Hong Kong down in 12th and bring out the first red flag in Formula E history by getting stuck in the chicane on the first lap. By the end of the race, he had earned himself 4 penalties, some his fault, some not, but the latter disqualified his P16 finish for leaving his car in an unsafe position in Parc Fermé. The next race wouldn't be much better, as he'd crashed on the final lap, finishing P13. And I'd like to say Marrakesh was better, but it really wasn't, starting at the rear and retiring early from a technical failure. Santiago, though, would definitely turn things around, and was his first of many opportunities at a race win. Lotterer would qualify P4, but start P3 just behind pole-winning teammate Vergne, and remain there for most of the race. He was able to take P2 just before the car swaps, after which he set his sights on his teammate for the lead. The Techeetah team were actually suffering technical issues in the pits, which meant they were struggling to communicate with their drivers, forcing Vergne to go conservative with his energy strategy being in the dark. This allowed Lotterer to close right up, and the two began battling, with Vergne on full defense mode. This culminated in the iconic moment on lap 33, in which Lotterer locked up, ran into the back of Vergne, essentially locking onto his rear wing, and pushed him through the corner. In the end, Vergne was able to hold off Lotterer and lead to Techeetah 1-2, an incredible performance by the team through all the adversity. Apparently, they had to send crew members into the other team's garages to even see what was happening on track. I can't even imagine what they were thinking during the collision. Unfortunately, it would be back to status quo, as he'd receive a drive-through penalty in Mexico after accidentally running over the foot of one of his crew members, and he'd finish outside the points again in Punta del Este. Rome would finally begin to turn things around, with Lotterer qualifying 4th, and after taking the overcut, fought hard with the Jaguar of Mitch Evans to secure his second podium in P3. This, by the way, is foreshadowing for later on. In Paris, he qualified P3 and late in the race, pushed past Sam Bird to take P2. On the final lap, though, he would run out of energy, causing a hard crash, but still end up P6. In Berlin, he had a quiet race and finished P9, while in Zurich he qualified P2 and ran up front for the majority before becoming one of 5 drivers to receive a drive-through penalty for speeding during the full course yellow. Still, though, he managed to just hold on and finish P4. Entering New York, all eyes would be on teammate Vergne, who was leading the championship and looking to clinch it in the first race. Techeetah were also locked in a close fight for the team's title with Audi, and Lotterer definitely had to play his part, as during the first race, both the Techeetahs were disqualified from qualifying for power over usage. But both would carve their way through the field, with Lotterer leading the way until he made it up to 5th, after which he let Vergne past. In the end, Verne would take the title with the P5, while Lotterer came across the line P7. For the finale, Lotterer would qualify P2 and hold it as Verne swept past for the lead. Techeetah were in a great spot to take the team's title until the FIA penalized Lotterer for jumping the start, awarding him a drive-through. Still, Lotterer was able to fight up from P14 to finish P9, though losing the team's title to Audi by an aggravating 2 points. This first year was the textbook definition of growth. He had one of, if not the best car on the grid, and after starting out slow, was able to work his way up to being a front-running contender, and was able to aid in his teammates' successful quest for a championship, with the two building quite a close bond despite their on-track antics. A P8 in the championship was a bit disappointing, but if he continued this form, he could definitely challenge for the Season 5 title. With the advent of the Gen 2 car came Techeetah's link-up with the brand DS to form DS Techeetah, easily the favorites for the title once again. And the year definitely looked to start that way, with the pair running 1-2 late in the race. Unfortunately, they'd both be handed drive-through penalties for exceeding max regen, but still recovered with Verne taking P2 and Lotterer taking P5. In Marrakesh, after qualifying way down in 20th, he'd go on a brilliant drive through the field to take P6. Santiago would be a bit quieter after starting 14th, making it as high as 7th before dropping back to finish P13. Mexico City would see another drive through the field, starting P12 and taking advantage of others' problems to finish P5. As of right now, Lotterer was actually sitting ahead of Verne in points, though still far adrift of leader D'Ambrosio. After starting P4 in Hong Kong, he would bide his time and slowly work his way forward, taking the lead from Sam Bird. Bird would stick with him though, saving energy. Safety cars didn't help Lotterer at all, especially with one going green with 2 minutes to go. The Hong Kong track was one that encouraged tight defense, but with the energy deficit, Bird was able to send it much further into each corner. On the penultimate lap, Bird sent his Virgin straight into the back of the DS Techeetah, the contact giving Lotterer a right rear puncture. From there, he did his best to hold on, but was powerless to the cars behind. And so after leading a race-high 26 out of 34 laps, the German limped it across the line in P13, losing what was surely his best chance at a Formula E victory. Definitely not Sam Bird's finest moment. A P4 in Sanya would get things back on track, before we came to Rome. Lotterer would score his first career pole position and would cruise off. Late in the race though, it would be the Jaguar of Mitch Evans, remember him from earlier, who would become a thorn in his side. With 16 minutes left in the race, Evans in attack mode closed in and made an aggressive move into the chicane to take the lead. From there, Lotterer was only able to do so much with an energy deficit, and relented as Evans took his first career win. Yet another race that could have gone Lotterer's way had he played things a little differently. Still, now he was P3 in points, only 3 back from the leader. The gap would narrow in Paris after a chaotic race in the rain and hail, in which Lotterer was able to stay relatively clean and take another P2, now just 1 back of leader Robin Freins. An awful qualifying in Monaco looked to derail things, but once again, Lotterer charged through the field to take P7. Near last to inside the points at Monaco, only in Formula E is this possible. A victory by Verne would mean that the Techeetahs were now 1-2 in points, just 1 point between them. He'd start at the rear again in Berlin after failing to set a final lap. Unfortunately though, a comeback wouldn't be in the cards this time, after retiring a few laps early due to a battery issue, dropping him to P3 in points. He'd have another tough result in Bern after finishing P4, but receiving a 22-second time penalty for exiting the pit lane while the light was red, a decision made after quite a bit of confusion from both the race officials, Lotterer himself, and the Techeetah team, all stemming from that lap 1 pileup. He would now drop to P4 in points, 44 back of race winner Verne, and a long shot heading into the finale in New York. Another bad qualifying run left him P16, right in the eye of the storm. Early on, the Dragon of Jose Maria Lopez was turned, causing a stack-up, in which Lotterer ran into the back of Verne, spinning himself around. Both the Techeetahs had damage and had to limp back to the pits. It was a disaster in terms of taking the team's title, and after Lotterer lost a lap, Verne was even on the radio calling for him to stop on track to bring out a safety car. The day really wouldn't get better for either driver though, as both failed to score any points and were involved in another accident with Felipe Massa. A catastrophic race that dropped Lotterer down to P6 in points, and both titles were still in question going into Sunday. Once again though, an abysmal qualifying performance left him starting P19, where he tangled once again with the Dragon of Lopez, giving both cars heavy damage and causing Lotterer to retire early. Fortunately though, Verne would secure P7, clinching his second consecutive Drivers' Championship and DS Techeetah's first ever team's title. It was a weekend of mixed emotions for everyone on the team, that's for sure. So in the end, Lotterer ended up P8 in the standings for the second year in a row, with 0 wins, 2 podiums, and a pole. This year had to be beyond frustrating for Lotterer. There were so many instances where he could have gained points, but didn't for one reason or another. 26 points lost in Hong Kong, 12 lost in Bern, and who knows what he could have had in New York if he hadn't binned at both races. The main issue for Lotterer this year was that the man just couldn't qualify to save his life. Yes, Formula E now had the group system where drivers higher up were at a disadvantage, but other drivers like Verne and Degrassi were easily able to skate by with at least a top 12 starting spot, which Lotterer failed to do in 6 races. He had incredible race pace and could carve his way through the field better than almost anyone, but on the tighter tracks like New York, that just wasn't possible this year. Still though, he had shown that he was a force to be reckoned with and was a valuable asset to any team on the grid, something that would prove to be crucial the very next year. On July 17, 2019, just a few days after celebrating Techeetah's championship in New York, Andre Lotterer announced that he would be leaving to join the brand new tag hero Porsche team for Season 6 alongside Neil Johnny. It may seem like a bit of a perplexing decision. Why leave what was hands down the best team on the grid for a new startup, especially when you had job security, had a teammate you got along really well with, and had a package you were used to? Well, for Lotterer, he wanted to take on the challenge of helping build a team off the ground with a company he had only gotten a taste of back in 2017 with their LMP1 program. He was longtime teammates with Johnny as well, and the opportunity presented a potential chance to return to sports car racing with them, something looking increasingly likely in just a few years' time. His first race would be brilliant, starting P7 and slowly working his way forward, getting lucky with the safety car and ending the day P2, scoring a podium for Porsche in their maiden race. The next day he'd start 10th, was almost killed by Buemi, and made it up to cross the line P6 before receiving a 24-second penalty for overtaking under a very confusing safety car period, ending up P14. Santiago would be an awful race, with Lotterer being disqualified for energy overuse after already having a bad day. He'd take pole position though the next race in Mexico City, but entering the first corner he was ran out wide by... Seriously? Mitch Evans again? He'd clipped the Mercedes of De Vries on rejoining, causing some front wing damage that would only get worse after a brush with the wall, eventually collapsing altogether, forcing him to retire from the race. After another good qualifying in Marrakesh, he'd start and run P3 for most of the race. As it drew to a close, however, he was once again in an energy deficit that forced him to lift off the gas, allowing Buemi, Mortara, Evans, and Degrassi pass to finish P8. So before the COVID break, he was sitting P12 with 25 points scored, while Johnny wasn't even on the board yet. As the 6-race Berlin finale began, Lotterer qualified P3 and ran an excellent race, battling with ex-teammate Verne and passing Bird late to secure a strong P2, moving him up to 7th in points. The next race would be solid as well, with a P12 start and P9 finish. Race 3 would see him start P7 and make some solid overtakes to finish P5, moving up to 6th in the standings. This though meant being sorted into qualifying Group 1, which left him starting P18. But in classic Andre Lotterer fashion, he charged up the grid to finish in P8. The next race after starting P7, he'd battle up front for the majority, challenging for a podium spot which he held until the very last lap, losing out in the penultimate corner to Rene Rast, nevertheless ending up P4, allowing him to leap up to 5th in points. Which of course meant a terrible qualifying for the next race, this time a P20, which he was only able to salvage up to a P14. So at the end of the season, it was his 3rd straight year scoring P8 in points with 2 podiums. This time he actually tied for P7, but lost the tiebreaker to... dude, again? But all jokes aside, this year was actually pretty impressive all things considered. Lotterer was racing for a brand new team with a brand new powertrain, and despite all the turbulence of 2020, he was able to build the program into a solid midfield operation capable of challenging for podiums. He set career highs in average starts and finishes, and thoroughly beat teammate Neil Johnny, who only managed 8 points. But at the end of the day, Lotterer had to be second-guessing his decision, as his replacement over at Techeetah, Antonio Felix da Costa, went on one of the most dominant runs in FE history to secure the Drivers' Championship with just 2 races to go. I'm sure now Lotterer would say he made the right decision, but it had to be weighing on his mind back in 2020. Season 7 would be the beginning of a decline for Lotterer's FE career. Paired up against one of the most promising young stars in Pascal Wehrlein, the 2020-2021 season would be one of the most wild years of motorsports history, and it certainly had its ups and downs for Lotterer. In Duria, he would start P7 but finish P16 after having to make a pit stop for some reason, and the next day crashed in FP3, missed qualifying, and finished the race P11. In Rome, he qualified a solid P2 but binned himself and Stoffel Van Dorn into turn 3. He would finish P9 but was given a 5-second time penalty, demoting him to P14. He was disqualified from qualifying the next day and had a stop-and-go penalty that would hinder any further progress. He started P6 in Valencia, spun Buemi around, served a drive-through penalty, spun Mortara around, and got beached in the gravel. Not one of his best races. The next race would be one of his best races though. After starting P5, he worked his way up to finish P3, promoted to P2 after Nato's penalty, his first points of the year. It was back to status quo in Monaco though, P19 start, P17 finish after a 5-second collision penalty. In Puebla, he'd finish P15 in race 1, get disqualified for the stupid tire declarations, then start P10 the next day, shove Sims into a wall, and somehow end up P17. The next string of races would be better, with a P8 and P5 capping off a solid weekend in New York, and a solid P4 in London after battling up front all race, and the disqualification of Buemi. But it was back to normal next race, P17. In Berlin, he'd start 14th and run a mostly clean race to finish P10, and finally for the finale, he'd qualify 7th, avoid the early chaos, and defend pretty aggressively to hold on to P4. And so all in all, Lotterer had one of the more chaotic seasons on the grid, and of course, the most chaotic season in history, ending up P17 in points, 6 spots behind teammate Wehrlein, who was easily the best Porsche driver this season, challenging for multiple victories, and having Puebla essentially snatched away from him. In all honesty, I can't tell you what happened to Lotterer this year, but dude was a complete menace on track. He'd always been an aggressive driver, especially in defense, but this year was on another level. It seemed like almost every race he'd make contact with someone, and every other race he'd receive a penalty. Over the course of the year, he racked up 8 penalty points, the most out of anyone on the grid for a drift of a race ban. Lotterer needed to clean things up for Season 8, especially since it was looking like his last in the series. For 2023, Porsche would be returning to the World Endurance Championship in the LMDH class with their all-new 963, and Lotterer was among the key names linked to the program. And since Porsche were not keen on allowing any of their main drivers to compete in a dual program, this was likely to be Lotterer's last season in Formula E. In the inaugural duels qualifying, Lotterer would make it to the semifinals in Diriyah starting P4 for the first race. He would battle up front for a podium until the late stages where he tumbled down the order due to energy, finishing P13. The next race would be a lot better, qualifying 5th and battling up front all night long, coming home P4. And the race that followed in Mexico City would be perhaps the final time in his career he would battle for the win. Both Lotterer and teammate Wehrlein made the duels, with Wehrlein taking pole and Lotterer taking P3. Both ran an excellent race at the front, slotting into 1-2 with Wehrlein leading with just over 12 minutes left. From there, the pair pulled away, getting up to a 9-second lead from P3. Unfortunately for Lotterer though, Porsche instructed the two drivers to hold position, and honestly, I can't really blame them. After so long, they would finally score a surefire victory in Formula E, and they weren't going to risk it now. So Wehrlein led home a Porsche 1-2, and Lotterer got to share what would be the final podium of his FE career with 2 of his teammates, Wehrlein and Jean-Eric Vergne, who managed to take P3. But man, if Lotterer had been able to take pole instead of Wehrlein, it could have been his victory Porsche would be ensuring. He would take 10th the first race in Rome, and after starting P3, would battle up front the next race, actually taking the lead with about 12 minutes to go. From there though, a safety car would close things right up and drain the rest of Lotterer's attack mode, leaving him powerless to a charging, dude, Evans again? In the end, he slipped back to finish P4, but a strong showing nonetheless, allowing him to jump up to P6 in points. In Monaco, he was punted off by Roland while running P6, but made up for it with another brilliant race in Berlin, in which he battled for a podium and was even a long shot for the victory, but in the end, he fell off late to finish P4 again, following it up with a P8 the next day. Jakarta would be the first time he'd failed to make the duels, but still qualified and finished a solid P9. A last place start in Marrakesh though would translate to a P15 finish, followed up by a P16 in New York after giving DaCosta a puncture. The next day wouldn't be much better, starting P3 but failing to get a jump off the line, tumbling down the order to finish P9. These unfortunately would be his last points of the year, as he'd take 2 P12s in London, was involved in the crash of all crashes in Seoul, and retired from another first lap incident in the finale. And so at the end of the day, Season 8 turned out to be miles better than Lotterer's Season 7. Though he had a bit of a late season collapse to end up P12, he was higher than teammate Wehrlein for a good chunk of the year, and really did seem to elevate his qualifying performances, making the dual stages in 50% of the season. Though still aggressive, he was a lot cleaner than the year prior, and it was clear he was a driver still capable of racing for podiums. But that was meant to be it, Andre Lotterer's last hurrah in Formula E. He had already been announced to the Porsche Penske WEC program, and ironically, Antonio Felix DaCosta had been signed to replace him at the FE team, and with the Gen 2 car being phased out, many weren't expecting Lotterer to be searching for a seat elsewhere. Surprisingly though, he was able to find one. After Avalanche and Andretti parted ways with driver Oliver Askew, Andre Lotterer seemed like the logical choice for them. He had quite a lot of Formula E experience, certainly more than teammate Dennis did, and had experience with a Porsche powertrain, who Andretti would be switching to. And Andretti didn't seem to have a problem with Lotterer competing in a dual program and prioritizing WEC, so it seemed like a match made in heaven. And their first race in Mexico would be great, with Dennis taking the victory and Lotterer battling up front but still coming up short of a podium to secure P4. He took a solid P9 the next race in Diriyah, but was only able to finish P12 the following day. He was able to recover from a P20 start in Hyderabad to take another P9, and scored another P9 in Cape Town after crossing the line P6, but being hit with 5 seconds for failing to stay with the safety car. He finished P12 after starting P21 in Sao Paulo, and after coming across the line P5 in Berlin, he dropped to P8, consequences of his actions. A crash the next race, and a crash in Monaco led up to a weekend at Jakarta where he'd be away testing for Le Mans, and Andretti hired David Beckman to fill in. He had an awful race in Portland, a crash in Rome, and another crash the second race in Rome. And while teammate Dennis was crowned world champion in London, Lotterer finished 13th after causing another collision, ending the year with a P21. So it's a toss-up with seasons 7 and 9 on which was the worst year of Lotterer's career. And honestly, I'd argue it was this one. 0 podiums for the first time in his career, only 5 points finishes, and a pitiful P18 in the standings behind the Neo of Dan Ticktum. And he did all of this in a car that teammate Jake Dennis scored 2 victories, a staggering 11 podiums, and to cap it all off, won the Drivers' Championship in. It was pretty clear at the stage that Lotterer's heart just wasn't in Formula E anymore, at least on the racing side, and he finally called it quits after this year. He's still very much involved in Formula E though. He was test and reserve driver for Porsche in 2023 and 2024, and is still one of the presenters of the Formula E broadcast. Again, a super far cry from his comments back in Season 2. But now, let's take a look at his full career stats. Statistically, Season 6 might be his best, with the best average start and average finish. Season 5 had a higher points per race, but of course also had 2 more races. It's honestly interesting to me just how close he was to Pascal Wehrlein during their time as teammates, who's obviously gone on to win the World Championship now, but Lotterer wasn't that far off. Again, I'd argue he was better than him for most of Season 8. He definitely fell off towards the end of the year though, and just fell off during the entirety of Season 9. It was obvious that he was prioritizing his commitments to sports car racing, and I can't really blame him. That's definitely where he loves racing the most, but his FE career isn't one to scoff at. If anything, it shows just how difficult Formula E is, if one of the most accomplished racing drivers in the world was unable to secure a win. Speaking of a win, there were 4 key races I think could have easily gone his way. Season 4 Santiago, Season 5 Hong Kong, Season 5 Rome, and Season 8 Mexico. And out of all of them, Hong Kong was easily the most disappointing loss. He had dominated that race, only for it to fall apart with less than 2 laps left. Yes, he was down on energy, but it was a track that was easier to defend at. If Sam Bird hadn't rammed into the back of him, it would have been very difficult to make the pass cleanly. I mean, the dude had a puncture and was still able to hold on for a good bit. But well, that was it. The complete career of Andre Lotterer in Formula E. A legendary sports car driver who, though had a very solid career, was never able to make it to the top step of the podium. Mostly due to Mitch Evans. Thank you all for watching, subscribe for more Formula E content, and I'll see you all in the next one.